Hey guys, it is Wednesday and I'm going to try to be as energetic as I possibly can, but fair warning, I'm in the early stages of what I hope will be a minor stomach flu. It's been going around. My husband got it. Now I have it. It's really not pleasant. But I think this is an important topic, and so I want to talk about it. I want to talk today about the reasons that freedom of expression is important, what it's intended to do, not what constitutes freedom of expression, what the limits of freedom of expression are. And something being a fundamental freedom does not mean it's an absolute freedom. You know, here in Canada, we limit freedom of expression for things like child pornography, hate propaganda, and defamation. We actually have a criminal form of defamation, which is you say something with the intent to get someone harmed. That's criminal. It's not just civil in this country. It's a very high burden of proof, but it is on the books. But I think it's important to understand the objectives underlying the guarantee of freedom of expression. And I'm going to use the Canadian version just because it's the one I'm most familiar with. But I am gravely concerned that for all this hue and cry about free speech, that the purposes of freedom of expression have been forgotten. And I think that these underlying what should be guarantees are actually being eroded in a very substantial way, and this is why I care so much about it. And those reasons, those underlying objectives are, firstly, free expression is instrumental in promoting the free flow of ideas essential to democracy and the functioning of democratic institutions. Secondly, free expression is an essential precondition of the search for truth. And thirdly, free expression is worth protecting for its intrinsic value to the self-realization of both speaker and listener. And I think that those three pillars of why free speech is important also help define whether something is actually, protected speech or expression, or whether it's actually something you shouldn't be doing, not just legally, but morally. And the thing I find is really being eroded nowadays is that second pillar, that essential precondition of the search for truth. Now, I know that freedom of speech gives many people the right to lie. But that's kind of assuming that thanks to freedom of speech, that lie will also be exposed. But we don't have that. Our media is so polluted now, and some people keep ragging on me for continuing to talk about the mainstream media. Well, the mainstream media is important precisely because it is mainstream. And the lack of faith in the mainstream media is exceptionally alarming to me as somebody who worked in it. I know firsthand the tug of war going on within mainstream entertainment and mainstream journalism and the various philosophies at play. It's like the Assassins versus the Templars. There were people like me who like to challenge boundaries, just to see whether the boundaries should hold within limits, right? We had to be reasonable, but when I worked at a music channel, we weren't allowed to talk about suicide because somebody decided that it would be copycats, and discussions of suicide had to be exceptionally serious, and we all had to say, don't do it, here's the number, every time it was played in a music video or anything like that. And of course, we know now that we need to encourage discussion about suicide and the issues surrounding suicide, and that actually helps people feel empowered to ask for help when they need it. And it's things like that. It's talking about any issue that may be potentially sensitive. Something being a sensitive issue is not enough to not talk about it because of that search for truth. But that also comes into the intrinsic value to the self-realization of both the speaker and listener. And I think this is also something that's being eroded in the hyper-partisanship that defines not just our politics, but our media and our entertainment as well. And of course, the three are all linked. But the self-realization is so critical because a partisan is not going to be very self-aware. They are a talking point, a walking talking point for whatever political association is paying them or compensating them in some way. And this is why I have such a problem with cable news punditry, is that a partisan is never going to admit they're wrong on an issue. A partisan will rarely concede a point. They're there to promote a specific view. So they're not there for their own voyage of self-discovery. They're not there to learn from an exchange of ideas. And I think this, even though it satisfies the on paper conditions for free speech, it doesn't really fulfill the underlying purposes of it. And this all comes down to, information is important so people can vote as an informed voter. And I don't want to get into politics on this one, but draw conclusions for yourselves on that one. I really don't feel like voters are being served by the way news is handled now, because the mainstream media seems predominantly interested in making money nowadays, and they're not even especially good at that, because innovation makes you money, but that's not the model they use. Whereas alternative media, there are a lot of hyper-partisan voices in alternative media, and alternative media personalities tend to build an audience based on a couple of issues they become known for, that become their thing. And my concern about that is when you're known, if people watch you because they know what you're gonna say on a certain point, then it doesn't give you any ability to evolve as a thinker and keep your livelihood. And so what? Too bad, some may say, but it is an issue. Oh, I realized the banner for this website isn't being displayed because it's under the text. This is a website for the Center of Constitutional Studies, in case you're interested. But it's concerning to me because I sit back and watch. The nice thing about being an introvert is I don't feel the need to draw attention to myself all the time. And so I can sit back and watch and pick my moments to speak. I don't need that constant feeding of attention. I don't know how extroverts do it because I'm not one. But the nice thing about being an introvert is I can sit back and watch, and I can sit back and watch how people engage and exchange. And it does give me a different view of a lot of issues. And some people think that me having a different view, even though I use examples and I back up my position, some people just feel that it adds to the dialogue to say I'm just stupid. And that's their right, but it isn't helping anything. I mean, that doesn't add anything to the discussion. And I just wish that there was a way, and on the internet, comments and things like that, I'm not talking about that. I'm talking about the people that are in positions of status that go on talk shows or popular YouTube shows and use that as a way to shut down. I mean, members of my own family do it. It's just like, well, that's bloody stupid. And I've got an interesting dichotomy in my family. It's been really interesting to watch that there's one part of my family that is super sensitive about anything. You're not even allowed to say stupid, or at least you weren't. But then, there's all these words you can't say because they're not nice, right? And that was a good learning experience in terms of what parts I agree with it and what parts I don't. I don't think you should be so concerned that you're hurting someone's feelings that you say absolutely nothing. And you don't say something is a problem when something is a problem for you. But on the other side of my family, there are, that kind of old traditionalist thing where people think they can just shut a conversation down by saying, well, that's bloody stupid. And, I've encountered this from everything from the music I liked as a kid to the interests I had, the number of times I was told that video games were bloody stupid, if I had a nickel. But that's not right either. And the problem with both these positions is that it discourages people from talking to each other. There's no point in talking to someone who the response is just going to be, well, that's bloody stupid. And it's very difficult to talk to somebody when you have to watch every word you use. The free flow of ideas, essential not just to democracy but to progress, comes in an environment that is somewhere in between. And right now, I'm not talking about the legalities of free speech. I'm talking about how do we maximize free speech. This is an optimization argument at this point. We can all agree that people have the right to offend. People have the right to hold unpopular views. And I wish more people realized that people had the right to hold unpopular views before they went on the attack. If there's one thing I have learned in my life, is the opinion of some random person cannot hurt you. Things like, legislation and unfair work practices can actually affect you in real terms. And the problem is right now the lines are blurring because there are two camps primarily of very extremist activists who are trying to blur the lines between unpopular opinion and public censure. And there have always been consequences to holding an unpopular view. I would hope that we would get better at that. There's almost been this return to what's the word I'm looking for? Dogma. And it's infected, so-called scientific communities as much as religious communities, that science is not treated as the best of what we know now and subject to change if someone can prove it. It's treated as no different from religion in terms of dogmatic adherence to it. And science is exceptionally important. I love science. I highly respect science because it's the closest thing to a sure thing that we have, scientific consensus. We're reasonably certain the world is round. We're reasonably certain water is wet, that kind of stuff. But when we get into things like freedoms, we have to be creative as well as logical, because these new ideas aren't fully formed yet. They are coming from the realm of philosophy more than anything. And these are very important aspects to freedom of expression, because the idea of tyranny, the idea of totalitarianism, the world, the universe, in raw terms, doesn't care at all if humans oppress other humans. We care about these things on, that unmeasurable thing that people confuse for weakness, and that's compassion. We have, as sort of underpinnings of our society, a belief that the strong have a certain moral responsibility to protect the weak. And not everybody agrees with this. Some people say might is right. I mean, that is one of the core totalitarian statements. And yet I see might is right in action all over the internet, all over our discourse. And you can't have a free flow of ideas in an environment where might is right. And this is why protection of the minority opinion is so significant. Because every good idea starts off as the minority opinion. And if we continue to play this numbers game of, well, the person with the most shouters or the person with the most bullies on their side wins, we're not going to progress, because the new ideas, just by their very nature, have fewer adherents. And if we're not given the opportunity to persuade, if people are punished for changing their mind, then we have no progress. And I think a lot of people have been sucked into echo chambers out of fear, feeling like they need a bully to stand up to the bullies that are plaguing them, that we've lost sight of that. We can disagree. I can hold my own views on certain things, and I'm not prepared to talk about some of those views publicly. That's going to be the topic for the Patreons this week, because I'm not prepared to discuss them. They don't add anything, really. They're just my ideas. I can't prove them. They're my beliefs. And I am able to separate my beliefs from what I can prove. And yes, my beliefs are based on facts. But there's certain ideas I'm ready to discuss. There's certain ideas I don't feel like I can effectively defend in public yet. And so I hold those back. Now, is this oppressing my freedom of expression? No, this is pragmatism, right? But right now, we're in a paradigm where the person with the most screaming wins, because public institutions are cowed, governments are cowed, politicians are cowed. People scream for long enough and loud enough, and they will get some sort of hearing, whether they really have valid points or not. Now, fortunately, most of the time, the people doing the screaming have a couple of valid points at the core of their argument. But then the question is, what happens next? We're so locked into this no retreat, no surrender, compromise is weakness paradigm that you can't have a victory in the current systems, because the minute you compromise the slightest principle, then you're a sellout. You know, we all kind of joke about that, but it's a very real driver of the way things get done, or more accurately, not done nowadays. Opinions evolve, and positions evolve, and people change their minds. And in a society that truly respects ideas, we would be more open to the idea that people may have reasons for what they do, that you don't understand that yet. And instead of yelling at them, ask. Because you're never going to agree with what they did, but you can understand better their reasons for it. Those are not the same thing. The reality is that freedom of expression comes with it a certain amount of responsibility. And you shouldn't be worried that the state is going to persecute you for what you say, but you do have to be prepared to be accountable for what you say. And so I'd like to challenge everyone, especially the people that claim to be free speech radicals, to really examine the underlying objectives to free speech and make sure that you are promoting freedom of expression in the spirit of the concept as well as the letter of it.